Hello, everybody. This is Holly, and this is my second infographic with students as an audience. And I chose to do my second infographic on do-insertion. So, for my first infographic for teachers as an audience, I chose to do adjectives, and I ended up writing in my reflection that I just felt that adjectives was too broad of a topic. I came up with too much information, and I feel like my infographic suffered a little bit because I couldn't decide what to include and what not to include. And so I decided for this infographic, I really wanted to do a smaller topic. Um, I think that I also chose a challenging topic for myself because I am normally a 6 through 12 teacher, so secondary. But I wanted to try and do an elementary topic because once I do get this ENL or ESL license, I am interested in working at the elementary level. So I kind of wanted to challenge myself at aiming at a younger audience and changing the way I worded things and the graphics I used, and my organization is kind of aimed at a younger group. So I'm thinking that this would probably be grade 1 through 3, probably. And so a lot of the things that I worded on this infographic are because I was catering to a younger audience. So I also feel like do insertion is a really interesting topic for me because when I was teaching Spanish at the high school level, that was one thing my English students had a hard time with was do in Spanish because they'd say, "Oh, well, what's the word for do?" Like in "Do you like pizza?" And I would have to explain to them there is no do in that particular sentence because Spanish doesn't have one. And they were all confused about it and didn't understand why they were lacking that word in Spanish. But actually, several languages don't have do insertion, and just I think it's an interesting topic overall. So, without further ado, I'm just going to kind of go ahead and start here. Um, my infographic, I started with a title or a heading up here of the word do, obviously. I did not call it do insertion. I think that that's too high level for the grades I'm aiming at here. So I called it do, and I called the helping verb instead of do insertion. So um, elementary students should probably already kind of understand helping verbs, and or if they hadn't, that would be something I could cover beforehand. And so kind of just a mini explanation that the word do doesn't actually mean anything in English, but it does need to be there to help the main verb. This again kind of using language one through student 1 through 3, grades 1 through 3. So then I started with um, the section, what does it look like? And I kind of changed what we did in our first infographic with using like linguistic terms to still trying to use linguistic sections, but not terms. So for example, like this whole section, what does it look like? This would be um, like the morphology section or the form section. So but I used this terminology instead, an easier thing to understand. What does it look like? And so I have do here in the middle, obviously, because that's where it usually stems from, is the word do. But then I also have does, because that's also a form of do. And I put underneath it that you would use it with he, she, and it. I have did down here, and I put underneath it used for the past. Um, I have don't and doesn't appear for do not and does not, and didn't for did not. So it's kind of like all of the forms that have to do with the word do, I just kind of included right here in this little section and tried to make it easy to understand. Do's in the middle because they're all a form of do, um, and then just kind of like what you would use them for. So that's the what does it look like section. Um, Underneath it, I have where does it go? So again, instead of saying syntax or syntactical position, I decided to use where does it go because that's what they would understand more. And I just kind of gave sections of examples here. I used the strategy, I think that was a suggestion on my first infographic from somebody, I don't remember who now, that I should start with examples and let them see patterns. So I decided to do that here. So I have section 1. I have the examples, do you like chocolate? Do we have a test? Did you see that? Does she play soccer? So trying to get them to see here that, okay, it can go at the very beginning of a sentence, especially when it's in a question. So this would be having them recognize the patterns here. There could be multiple patterns. It's at the beginning when it's a question. In section 2, it says, you do like chocolate. We do have a test. You did see that. She does play soccer. So right here, they might notice that it is right in front of the verb. So right in front of like, right in front of have, right in front of see, right in front of play. And then underneath that, I have a third section, and it says, you do not like chocolate. You do not have a test. You did not see that. She does not play soccer. So in this section, I might be trying to have them realize, okay, it can come right before not. So not only can it come right before the verb, but it comes right before not as well. And then my fourth section says, you like chocolate, don't you? We have a test, don't we? You saw that, didn't you? She plays soccer, doesn't she? So in this section, maybe they're obviously tag questions. I don't know if we might have gone over that before, but they could start to see that pattern as well, that it comes after a comma and it kind of makes a question on the end of a sentence. And then the last section down here, why do you like chocolate? When do we have a test? How did you see that? Where does she play soccer? And so maybe in this section they realize the pattern of it comes after a question word and before the pronoun or before the subject. So I kind of just I used all the same example sentences on purpose to kind of even like accentuate those patterns. But then I kind of have this little section right here. What do you notice about that? So maybe all those things that I was trying to get them to see, I would take a second out and have them jot all of that down. So in number 1, they would write that it comes beginning of a sentence, especially when it's a question or something like that. I would try to have obviously them come up with it themselves first, and then I might go over that as a group or as a class to kind of highlight what I was trying to get them to see. And then I could move on to why do we use this do or the forms of do. So the 3 main reasons why we use do are to emphasize. So to show here, like, I ran in track, that is a perfectly grammatical sentence, but to say I did run in track, it emphasizes. Maybe someone told you, oh, she didn't run in track, but you'd say I did run in track. So that kind of emphasizes. Do you all like music? We do like music, as opposed to just, yeah, we like music. Andy watches football versus Andy does watch football. So it kind of emphasizes the verb here in the phrase. The second reason why we use do is to make something negative. Now, obviously, that does go along with not, and they could probably pick that pattern out as well. But instead of I did run in track, it's I did not run in track, or I didn't. I kind of show the contractions here going on. We don't like music, or we do not. Andy doesn't or does not watch football. So it shows, instead of calling it negation, I kind of put it down to an easier level to make something negative. So the last reason why we use do is to make yes or no questions. So I took, again, the same examples I'd been using, turned them into questions. Do you run in track? Do you all like music? Does Andy watch football? So it kind of just reiterates the patterns that they found up here in section 2, and they kind of apply them down here for why we use them. At this point, maybe I might even have them make up their own. So maybe we might go back and I'd say, all right, make me a negative sentence using do or a form of do. Or I might say, make me a yes or no question using a form of do. So they could always come up with their own examples, because the more examples, I think, the better, obviously at a young age as well. I have a little caution section down here because there is one thing, and normally I would probably save the caution sections for the older grades, but in this case you do have to point out that sometimes do is the main verb and not just the helping verb, which means it's the only verb in action. So there are sentences you see with the forms of do and does and did and things like that, but they're not the helping verbs. They're not the auxiliaries. They are the main verbs. And I would not use the term auxiliary with them, so I used helping instead. But in these examples, do is the main verb. So she does her homework. They do all of the chores. He does karate after school. So maybe at this point I'd have them think of maybe their own example where do is not a helping verb, it's the main verb. Lastly, I have a practice section. So I tried to make it as simple and concise as I could. So I started with a number one, make these statements into a question using a form of do. So this goes back to why we use do, and it's to form questions. So instead of you like to eat pizza, I'd be hoping that they would write, do you like to eat pizza? And the kids play on the playground outside. Do the kids play on the playground outside? Or I could even have them go past tense as well. Like, can you put that in a past tense question? They would use did instead. My second set of questions says make these statements negative using a form of do. So instead of Katie draws in art, Katie does not draw in art. And instead of I talk on the phone, I don't, or I do not talk on the phone. So at this point, they could be practicing using, in this particular example, Katie draws an art class. They'd kind of have to realize, oh, when we go from Katie draws an art class to negative, Katie does not draw. It goes from draws to draw. And I might point that out at some point too, that when you do make these sentences negative with do, in the he, she, it form, it drops the S. That might be a little too complicated, but maybe I could give them extra examples that would kind of highlight that difference there. And then maybe looking at these examples of what kids come up with, I would see which ones are comfortable using the contraction of don't and do not, or doesn't and does not, and who is not comfortable using those. So that would be something I'd be looking for there. And then in my last example I have, or my last practice section, I have in these statements is do the main verb or the helping verb. So kind of to help them realize in my last little caution section here, put that to work, which ones, when it's a helping verb and when it's a main verb. So for example, my top one says, I do a lot during the summertime. Well, do in this case is the only verb in the sentence, so they would hopefully figure out that that is the main verb. We did take pictures at the dance. That's an example of emphasis there. Take is the verb, therefore did is the helping verb. And then I put a challenge down here because I have two forms of do, and maybe they would see that right away or maybe they wouldn't. But do here, this particular do, is the main verb because it's doing the homework, but didn't is the helping verb that makes it negative. So that would kind of be a challenge for the class to kind of look at there, that there's a helping verb and a main verb do in the same sentence. So hoping that I did the grades 1 through 3 lesson justice, because again, I think that was my first time trying to do something at that level instead of trying to do high school. So I would hoping as well that I still did this infographic in a linguistic perspective, even though it is lower level, and hoping that I did do insertion justice as well. So please, comments, questions, concerns, criticisms, suggestions, whatever are all welcome, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.